In a small town, at the end of a harsh winter, an 18-year-old black boy, an orphan, rides his late mother's old bicycle, struggling to survive through delivery work and doing whatever it takes to have a place to sleep each night. While rushing to complete his final delivery of the day, he stumbles upon an elderly woman, alone and lost at a bus stop. Helping her means missing the delivery and possibly losing his only shelter. But he doesn't hesitate. He pedals her all the way home. What he doesn't know is that she's a billionaire, and what happens next will change his life forever. The wind grew colder that evening, the kind that nipped at your ears and slipped quietly down your neck, even if your coat was buttoned tight. At the edge of a quiet town in early winter, where the sun dipped early behind thinning trees and streetlights flickered with a sluggish pulse, an old bus stop sat abandoned at the end of a cracked sidewalk. People passed by as always, some with grocery bags tugging at their wrists, some with eyes locked on phones, some hurrying home before darkness settled in fully. But none of them looked at the old woman. She stood alone, wrapped in a beige woolen coat that had seen better decades, her silver hair poking out from a once white knit cap. Her small hands clutched a tattered leather purse as she turned to look at every passing car, hoping it might be the one she was waiting for. Her mouth moved, murmuring about the number 12 route, about a street that didn't quite match anything around here. Every few moments she stepped toward the curb, only to shuffle back, confusion clouding her face. Not far away, a young man named Andre stopped to drink from a dented metal water bottle. Barely 18, his frame was stretched thin by time and hunger, wearing a faded hooded jacket from too many winters and shoes that held together more out of habit than craftsmanship. His old bicycle leaned against the bench behind him, rusted chains, squeaky pedals, and a rickety back rack that looked ready to fall off if nudged too hard. It had belonged to his mother, and after she passed, it became his only means of work. Zipping around town delivering parcels, groceries, medicine, anything people needed. The pay was barely enough to scrape by, but Andre worked with quiet urgency. That evening, he had one last delivery to make before the clock struck 8. He completed it. He'd have just enough to pay his week's rent. If not, the landlord had made it clear, the key would no longer fit the lock by morning. Andre tightened the strap of his delivery bag ready to ride when his eyes caught the old woman near the stop. Something about her stillness struck him, not like someone waiting but someone lost. She turned, looked around, then down at her own feet, as if they had become unfamiliar. She muttered something, took a half step forward, then stopped. Andre hesitated. The clock ticked louder in his chest. Minutes mattered now, the difference between warmth and the street. But then the wind shifted, carrying her voice to him, faint, shaky, but unmistakably frightened. Willow Lane, or maybe Garden. Bus 12? Her words tumbled like loose leaves and no one else seemed to hear. Without quite knowing why, Andre walked over, pushing his bike beside him. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Are you all right?" She blinked at him, unsure, like someone looking at a distant memory. "I was trying to get home," she said, her voice light and wandering, "but I think I missed the bus, or maybe it missed me." Her laugh was small, brittle, like glass threatening to crack. Andre nodded slowly. "Where do you live? Maybe I can help you get there." She looked down at her purse, rummaged through it without purpose. A handkerchief, a capless lipstick, coins, buttons, a bus transfer from 2 days ago. But no address. Andre's heart tightened. Then something caught his eye. A delicate silver chain around her neck, with a small oval pendant resting against her coat. He leaned closer, squinting. Engraved in elegant cursive on the back were the words, "Evelyn Rose, 48 Oak Hill Drive, North Side." His breath caught. Oak Hill, he knew the area, way out past the edge of town, nearly 2 hours by bike, mostly uphill. For a moment, his mind went to the clock. He'd miss the delivery, lose his room, sleep in the cold tonight. But as he looked, into Evelyn's eyes, soft, clouded with age, and the childlike trust forming simply because he'd stopped to ask, he knew he couldn't walk away. Some choices weigh more than others, even if they don't make sense on paper. He forced a smile. "That's a bit far, but I think we can make it," he said gently, helping her onto the bike's back rack. He tied his spare scarf around the seat, wrapped his jacket around her shoulders. "Hold on tight, all right? We'll go slow," she chuckled, dazed but grateful, and said, "You remind me of someone, my grandson. He used to wear shoes like those. Always scuffed, always proud." Andre didn't correct her. He nodded and began to pedal, slowly at first, then steadily, as the town lights faded behind. The sky turned lavender, then gray, then darker still. The road sloped, bent, stretched endlessly, but Andre kept going. Every turn of the pedal echoed with purpose. Behind him, Evelyn hummed a tune, sometimes trailing off, sometimes pausing to ask where they were, then forgetting the answer minutes later. He answered each time as if it were new. "We're getting closer, don't worry, just over the next hill." The wind grew sharper, streetlights rarer, but he kept his eyes forward. They passed fields sleeping under frost, crossed bridges lit only by moonlight, and paused once for Evelyn to catch her breath. He bought her warm tea from a roadside gas station with his last dollar, and she insisted he take the first sip. "You need it more," she said with a tender sternness that reminded him of his mother. When the gate of 48 Oak Hill appeared, whitewashed, paint chipped, ivy curling around iron bars, it was nearly 9:30 p.m. Andre's legs ached, his hands numb, but he exhaled in relief. He knocked once, then again. An elderly man in a housecoat opened the door, his expression shifting from panic to disbelief when he saw the woman behind Andre. "Miss Evelyn, oh my lord, where have you been? We've been calling hospitals." Evelyn looked around, blinked. "I went for a walk, or a ride, I suppose." She smiled at Andre. The man thanked Andre profusely, his voice trembling. "Come inside, warm yourself, have something to eat. Let us give you a ride back." But Andre shook his head, weary but content. "No need. I should get back before it gets colder." He scribbled his number on a torn receipt, handed it over. "In case she ever needs help again." With that, he got back on his bike and rode off into the dark, unaware that his room would be locked, his bed replaced with a storage closet floor, but also unaware that something far more meaningful had begun. By the time Andre reached the edge of town, the streetlights had thinned, and the warmth from the gas station tea had faded from his hands. His knuckles were stiff, every bump rattling through the handlebars into his bones. But he didn't complain. The ride back was quieter, lonelier without the gentle voice behind him, or the small, familiar weight of someone trusting him to keep pedaling. The wind picked up, whistling through bare trees, carrying the first sense of deep winter, wood smoke, cold metal, and something bitter that always hung in the air after 9 Andre coasted the last block to his boarding house, a narrow, two-story with peeling paint and a porch light that never worked. He parked his bike, climbed the steps, reached into his pocket for the key, only to find empty space. At first, he thought he'd checked the wrong pocket, but after searching every corner, every seam in his jacket and jeans, the truth became painfully clear. The key was gone. He knocked gently, hoping the landlord was awake, but no lights came on. He knocked again, louder. Nothing. When he tried the doorknob, it didn't budge. Then, as if to confirm the inevitable, he glanced down and saw his belongings. Spare shirt, towel, cracked phone charger, stuffed in a plastic grocery bag, left beside the door like yesterday's mail. A note was taped to the door, whisper in thick black marker. "Past due." Locked. His breath caught. He stood there a long minute, bike at his side, unsure whether to curse or cry. He did neither. Instead, Andre turned toward the center of town. His legs ached from the ride to Oak Hill and back, but he didn't let them rest. He pedaled slowly, knowing there was nowhere to go but needing to move, because the cold was settling into his chest, and stillness would only make it worse. It was nearly midnight when he passed the back alley of Johnson's Market, a corner store where he sometimes restocked shelves for day-old bread and a few dollars. The owner, Mr. Johnson, was kind in the way older men often were to kids they saw struggle without asking for help, gruff, but never cruel. Andre parked his bike behind the dumpster, knocked on the side door, and waited. A light flickered inside. The door creaked open, and there stood Mr. Johnson in a heavy robe, holding a steaming mug of something strong. He took one look at Andre, shivering, hollow-eyed, and sighed through his nose. "Didn't make rent, huh?" Andre shook his head. Mr. Johnson looked at the sky, as if waiting for some higher authority to intervene, then stepped aside. "Storerooms. Dry. Caught in the corner. Don't touch the wine crates and don't freeze to death on me." Andre nodded, murmured, "Thank you," and stepped inside. The storeroom smelled of cardboard and citrus, the only heat from an old radiator that groaned like it held a grudge. Andre didn't mind. He pulled the cot's blanket around his shoulders, collapsed onto the thin mattress, limbs heavy, chest sore, but heart strangely quiet for the first time in weeks. He wasn't afraid to close his eyes. Something about the ride, Evelyn's hand on his shoulder, her laughter in the dark, had made the world feel less jagged. He drifted to sleep, thinking not of the locked door but of the silver pendant, the soft hum of wheels on gravel, and a voice that said, "You remind me of someone I love." Outside, the wind howled against the store's walls, but inside, Andre slept soundly, unaware that miles away, a woman sat at her kitchen window, now fully awake. In her lap was the coat she'd worn that night, and in her hand, a torn receipt, with a phone number scrawled in uneven blue ink. Evelyn rose, no longer lost in fog, stared at the paper and whispered his name like a prayer. The first warm thing she'd spoken into the quiet house in years. Morning arrived with a hush, pale and hesitant, as if the sky itself was unsure whether to wake. A soft gray light crept across the back room of Johnson's Market, filtering through the dust-frosted window, settling over Andre, still curled beneath the thin blanket. The cold clung to the walls, slipped through cracks in the old frame, wrapped around his bones, but he didn't stir. Not yet. His body ached in the way that follows a long night on a hard cot, but deeper was the heaviness in his chest, not from physical strain but from too many days balancing survival on a threadbare wire. When he rose, it was without complaint. He folded the blanket carefully, tucked it against the wall, and moved quietly to the front of the store, rubber soles silent on the linoleum. Mr. Johnson was already there, as always, opening up with the stoic routine of a man who'd learned consistency, was its own kind of faith. He grunted when he saw Andre, pushed a banana and a half-warmed cup of coffee toward him. No words, just quiet acknowledgement, more meaningful than conversation. Andre took the banana with a quiet thanks, peeled it slowly, and stood by the window, watching the town exhale into motion. Steam rose from car hoods, children shuffled along sidewalks clutching backpacks, and somewhere, a dog barked once, then fell silent. Just another day, another morning like all the ones before, until the black car pulled up. It was the kind of car that didn't belong on these streets, too polished, too quiet, gliding to the curb like it was answering a summons. The man who stepped out was tall, lean, his coat too fine for this town, his shoes unscuffed, his posture deliberate. He glanced at a slip of paper, then looked through the store window, eyes landing on Andre like he'd always known where to find him. When the bell over the door chimed and the man stepped in, the room seemed to shrink. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth but weighted. "I'm looking for someone named Andre." Andre turned from the window, frozen for a breath. "That's me," he said cautiously. The man's expression softened with relief. "Miss Evelyn Rose sent me," he said. "She asked me to find you. She remembers everything and wants to thank you. She insisted." Mr. Johnson paused mid-sip of his coffee but said nothing. Andre looked at the man, then at the receipt in his hand, his own handwriting, the number he'd scrawled before riding into the dark. It hadn't been meant for anything more than a lifeline. He never expected it to be used. Charles, as he introduced himself, held the door open, gesturing to the car. "She's waiting if you're willing." Andre hesitated, something flickering in his eyes. The idea of returning to that house, stepping into a world that wasn't his, felt like standing barefoot at the edge of a polished ballroom floor. He was just a delivery boy, no place to sleep, No family, no finish line. He'd done what was right, that was all. I just wanted to make sure she got home safe, he said quietly, but firmly. That's all it was. Charles regarded him. For a moment, neither offended nor insistent. And you did, he replied. But she believes you gave her more than directions. She said you gave her back a sense of herself. She'd very much like to tell you that in person. Andre looked to Mr. Johnson, who shrugged with the indifference. He used to mask concern. Go, he said. Your cot'll be here if you need it. With a breath too large for his chest, Andre nodded and followed Charles out. The drive to Oak Hill was surreal in daylight. The trees that had loomed like shadows the night before now stood tall, still, sentinels of a secret forest path. The turns felt shorter, the hills less steep. But Andre remembered everyone, each stone and slope etched into the memory of his legs. When they reached the grand white house, it no longer looked like a monument, but a memory, familiar, softened by the hour. Charles led him through a side entrance into a room filled with sun, old books, and quiet warmth. There, by the window, was Evelyn. Not the dazed, wandering woman from the night before, but someone entirely different. Her eyes were sharp, hair neatly pinned, and when she saw Andre, her smile broke over her face like morning over mountains. You, she breathed, her voice trembling just enough to show its truth. You brought me home. She reached for his hands, her grip gentle but insistent. I remember everything, every street, every word. You didn't treat me like a stranger. You made me feel safe. Andre bowed his head, unsure what to say, the praise too large for the simple act he'd performed. But Evelyn wasn't done. She leaned forward, eyes searching. I don't know your story, she said. But I'd like to. And if you don't have a place to go, I'd be honored to offer you one here. Not just for tonight, but longer. If you'd let me. This house has too many rooms and not enough kindness. You would change that. Andre blinked, the offer catching him off guard. It was generous, more than generous, but something in him resisted. He took a step back, voice low but steady. That's kind of you, really, but I didn't do this to get anything. I just wanted you to be safe, that's all. Evelyn's eyes didn't waver. And that, she said softly, is exactly why I want you to stay. He didn't answer. Right away. The silence between them stretched, gentle but uncertain, filled with a feeling neither could quite name. Though Andre returned to the market that night, slept again in the storeroom, and woke to the same cold, something had shifted. He had been seen, not for what he lacked, but for what he carried, the quiet, steady light of someone who showed up even when no one was watching. Far from that sunlit room, Evelyn sat with a heart less alone, already preparing for tomorrow, when she would offer again. Not out of charity, but out of recognition. Because sometimes, family is not who we're born to, but who we choose to walk home with in the dark. The next morning came with a gentler sky, brushed with faint streaks of pale gold peeking shyly through faded curtains of cloud, as if the sun itself hesitated to intrude on the day's stillness. In the back room of Johnson's Market, Andre rose early, as always, sweeping the floor, stacking crates in neat, quiet rows. His mind, too full of Evelyn's visit the day before, couldn't focus on the rhythm of work. He replayed her words through the night, each syllable lingering like the last note of a hymn that refused to fade. Her presence hadn't overwhelmed the room, it had warmed it. Yet Andre didn't know what to do with such a gift. He'd never had anything offered so freely, so tenderly, and certainly not from someone who looked at him without judgment, only with hope. As he set down a box of canned peaches, the doorbell jingled, not the impatient clatter of a regular customer, but a soft, measured chime that felt familiar. He looked up from behind the counter, and there she was again. Evelyn rose, this time with no driver, no coat of grandeur, just a wool shawl wrapped neatly over her shoulders and a small leather handbag tucked into the crook of her arm. Her expression was kind, her eyes already searching the room for him, as if she knew exactly where he'd be. Andre straightened instinctively, hands wiping unconsciously on his jeans as he stepped forward. She smiled and walked toward him. Not with the authority of someone used to commanding space, but with the gentleness of someone who decided to share it. "I hope you don't mind me coming again," she said softly, her voice warmer than the morning light. "I've been thinking about you all night." She paused, then added, "I suppose that sounds strange, but I mean it kindly." Andre nodded, not trusting his voice yet. She looked around the store, then leaned closer, as if what she was about to say belonged only to the air between them. "I've lived in that big house for a very long time," she began, "and it has never felt so quiet as it did this morning. Not even after my husband passed, not even after my grandson." She trailed off, drew a breath. "You remind me of him, you know. His kindness, his eyes, the way he always listened more than he spoke. And when you helped me that night, without asking, without expecting, something in me woke up, something that had been sleeping for years." Andre looked down, the tips of his fingers curling slightly against the counter's edge. Evelyn reached into her bag, pulled out a folded piece of paper, handwritten, slightly trembling lines of ink on thick stationery. "This is not a contract," she said. "It's not a deal or an arrangement. It's simply an invitation. I have a home with too many rooms and too few reasons to keep them closed. I'd like you to stay, just until you find your footing. No strings, only support." Andre opened the note slowly. It was an offer to stay at the estate, a modest monthly stipend, and beneath that, in softer script, a promise. "We'll find a way for you to return to school, if you still want that." He didn't speak for a long time. The world outside the window moved as if through syrup. Cars passed slowly, leaves turned in the breeze, and the town went about its day, unaware that inside this little store, something important was quietly shifting. Finally, Andre looked up, met her eyes, not with fear, but with something steadier. "I'd like that," he said. "I'd like to come." And so he did. That afternoon, Charles came by with the car, not out of ceremony, but because Evelyn insisted Andre not ride that creaking bicycle up the long hill again. He packed his few belongings in a backpack, said goodbye to Mr. Johnson, who only nodded, handed him a paper bag of sandwiches and muttered, "About time." Then Andre climbed into the back seat of a vehicle that smelled faintly of pine and possibility. Life at the estate was not extravagant. It was peaceful. Andre was given a sunlit room overlooking the garden, a schedule that allowed him to rest, read, and within a month, return to school with the help of a scholarship fund Evelyn quietly created in his name. She never paraded his story, never treated him like a pet project. Instead, she welcomed him into the rhythm of her days. Morning walks in the greenhouse, long discussions over tea, weekends filled with ideas about what they could do with the time and resources they now shared. Together, they created something Evelyn had dreamed of, but never built alone. A small foundation funded from her estate, called the Willow Light Fund, in honor of the street she couldn't remember, and the kindness she would never forget. Its mission was simple: to support young people with potential but no path, to shelter the elderly who had slipped through the cracks, and to remind anyone listening that dignity and care were not luxuries, they were birthrights. Andre helped design the first programs, met with counselors, worked part-time at the community center the foundation renovated, and every so often still rode his old bicycle into town, not because he had to, but because it reminded him of where he'd begun and what one small act of grace could grow into when offered without expectation. Each time he passed the old bus stop where it all began, he'd slow down, tip his head toward the sky, and smile. Because sometimes you don't find home, it finds you. And sometimes all it takes to change the course of a life is the willingness to stop, to see someone clearly, and to ride a little farther than you planned. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons in heartfelt empathy.